school doesn't start tomorrow. School doesn't, honey, school starts tomorrow. She's just having a super panic attack, like hyperventilate, like, oh, we're in top. I said, no, this is Charlotte. So this is my 11-year-old. Yeah, she has bad anxiety. Anything new or changing different? I'm like, honey, summer's not over.
This conference will now be recorded.
School started. So.
Man, I was messing around with some of those AI tools I sent you. Yeah, they're really sweet. They're really cool. That I think that Fireflies one is one of the better ones I've seen. That was really fun. The new meta one, the Llama 2, is you can use your own API and have it just yours private. Yeah.
Comprehensive safety action plan.
Did you get on it? You'll have to
You
tell me about
can
it.
No, there's grant money.
you can use some of those things if you get a license for private. You know what I mean? And you get the protections that come with it. But if you're just on the
good?
bet putting it into your recording,
Okay.
man, it's
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Truth in Taxation hearing this evening for Tuesday, August 22nd. We're just going to jump right in tonight. We are going to move on to item 2, an approval of minutes for our last HCSEA meeting.
Motion to have the minutes of the August 22nd, 2023 be prepared and distributed to each member of the HCC board. The board will have 10 days to review the minutes and submit any changes to the secretary. If after 10 days there are no changes, the minutes will stand approved. If there are changes, the process will be followed until all changes are made and the board is in agreement.
a second.
Motion by Sherry, second by Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the reason we're here tonight, public hearing tonight on the proposed tax increase. The way we're going to go through this, we're going to do a presentation on the recommendation, the concept, the ideas, and then we will get to public comment, and then we'll turn back to the council for discussion and vote on that point. So I will turn over to Nathan. Are you running point on this tonight?
I am. Do we have the clicker? I'm not going to go down there to do it. I'll sit here so I can see the audience. All right, so there's a lot of information here council has seen. I will cover it briefly more for the audience because I don't know how many of them have endured the last several meetings we've had. So quick history on the Herriman Police Department. So formed in 2017, that 2017-2018 timeframe. We took the rate that had been set at that time for UPD, just incorporated that, and it's been that since. Now, if you look at your taxes, you'll see that that mill rate itself has gone down, even though you may be paying more. That has to do with some Utah law, but we have not changed it. The city hasn't changed its rate, or what it was the amount it was trying to collect in that time. Since we went from, and these are census numbers, we think, and this is as of July 1, 2022, there's a whole lot of discussion. The uncontrolled number has us closer to 63,000, but then there's a factor that the Census Bureau uses to bring you back in line with what they think the state and the county has grown. And so our number is 59,184 last July, and we started at 48,000. So we're 11,000 plus new residents from the time this was formed. We started with 35 officers. Through those intervening years, we're now up to 42. Just basic inflation through CPI is 23% since we formed, but we've seen the police salaries. There is a marked shortage of police officers in the country, and we've seen salaries in the Salt Lake area increase 37% since 2018. A majority of that since 2020. Over that time, here is a chart that shows what our calls for service look like. As you see, as we add people, they demand services. We were asked how many officers we have, how do we weigh? One of the statistics the FBI uses is how many officers you have per 1,000. And I will say it tells you really important things like how many officers you have per 1,000. It doesn't really tell you anything else, but it is one way to compare, well, how are we looking compared to others. So if you look on this, we're at 0.64 officers. It's actually the lowest of all of our neighboring cities and the ones that we typically look at as competing for the same officers. Our number of calls have gone up over that time, and so the number of calls we're dealing with per officer are actually one of the highest in the area. Not the highest, but one. And then that crime rate data, crime increases, but we're not seeing like a marked increase, more crime for the people coming in. It's just as more people come, that crime per 1,000, that number seems to be holding true. But as we add 11,000 people, you now add 11 times that number. So for the council, we've talked a lot about this, but for the citizens, when the police department looks at its growth and when they need to add officers, we're asked a lot of times, well, is it just by population? And the answer is no. Certainly population probably plays a part in how these metrics run. So we're very much data-driven. And in the police world, they've broken this up into 3 areas. So because in the police department, there are 3 kind of operations, your more administrative side and your special services. They have different growth pressures happening inside there. They're not equal, they're not the same. And so for administration, we're looking at the things, what are those, what's happening in their world, how much time they're spending. And the one thing we've seen, again, since 2020, is a doubling in the number of records requests we've received. So as we looked at that, we have a certain amount of time to respond. Last year, we hired another records specialist to help with that demand. I don't know if during COVID, people all of a sudden decided they wanted to read police records more, but that's what we're definitely seeing is a marked increase. Operations, which is probably the part of the department that most people see and interact with. This is your patrol function. So the Centers for Public Safety Management did some work back in 2013, 2012 to say, what are the most appropriate metrics for when you add or when you're properly staffed? And so they came up with a 60, 60, 60. In Herriman, we've added a 460, and I'll explain what that is. The first 60 deals with are 60% of your resources forward-facing? Are those resources actually out amongst the citizens? So we track that. We're well above 60% of our officers are actually forward-facing, meaning they're not in offices doing work. They're actually out on the street doing interactions with people. The second 60 that we track has to do with what we call saturation times. How busy are the officers? So through that study, they determined that when an officer hits 60% committed time, they are completely reactive. They're meaning they're just going from call to call to call. That 40% they're not committed doesn't mean they're not doing anything, but it's typically your reports, your other things that they have to do that are not tied to a call, but they're not doing proactive patrol. They're not. If somebody says, hey, I've had some concerns, could you drive by? Once you're above 60%, they're not driving by. They're only coming when a call. So that's a statistic we watch pretty closely. The next 60, and we're below that now. The next 60, that is, are you spending more than 60 minutes average per call? That tends to go with your more violent crime, your person crimes. Frankly, some of our domestic violence crimes are long for officers there. And so we track that. We try to say, where are we at? Because any of these you start to trigger, you start to have a problem where you might need more. The last 60 is one, it's more Herriman-centric that we pick because we have this kind of strange boundary you see on the map there that stretches down. Our decision was, can we get from our patrol districts, how fast can we get to our homes where people might call? A response to a call, not all calls are equal, right? There's certain we have to be there quickly. And so trying to figure out how fast can we get there? Because when you're in trouble, that's when it matters to you, how fast we get there. And so using some GIS and mapping, we try to figure out where do we station our patrol officers so that in an instance we can get cars the fastest through the city given the road network we have and some of those other challenges. So if it's blue, we're getting there. We do have some extent policing areas that are a little bit harder. You see some of the yellow, there aren't any roads there right now. So as they build roads, we'll see how we get there. That will play a lot. And then there's also some minimum staffing for officer safety. In order to have enough officers on to back one another up, we use that metric as well. So we track those. Chief actually tracks that daily, and then we roll it up monthly, and we look at it quarterly and annually. The last one, special services, those are your detectives. It's based on the number of cases they have, the types of cases. We monitor that. Says school construction, schools. When we build a secondary school in Utah, we are required to provide a school resource officer. Now, we can negotiate with the school and get some money back. It's about 45% right now that we get back from the school, but we still have to hire and put that officer in. And we have not all of these, we have 18 schools in Herriman. Not all of them are secondary schools, but we have a lot. And that rolls into all sorts of other things we as a city have to do. So that's again a separate area. We try to track how do we know when we need to add officers. So if somebody asks me, is it based on population? The answer is, well, it's going to play a role, but it depends on how it impacts these statistics. And we, as I said, Chief tracks this regularly, he and his staff. We've also been asked, how are we fitting with salaries? Are we paying too much? Is that one of our challenges? We're right in the middle of the market. As I said, Salt Lake has seen a marked increase in salaries, and Herriman is that dark line there. We're not the highest, we're not the lowest. We just simply try to stay competitive, and that's really driven by that police market. It's the same people who are propense to be police officers are also those likely to join the military. If you've been following that, there aren't as many people joining the military. So it is a challenge right now, just nationwide, to attract police officers. Fleet, this represents one of our biggest investments in, frankly, as a city. So a lot of what I want to say for council, these will also apply as we look at it in the city and the general fund, but this is specific to police tonight. So a lot of increases we've seen in costs of vehicles over the last few years. I've also had a really tough time getting vehicles. So right now they kept canceling our orders, so we kept ordering the ones that we needed. They all came in at once, and so we have a bunch sitting out in the parking lot because they have to then be upfitted with all the police gear, the lights and everything, and there's a backlog on that. And so some of those cars you see out there are waiting to get that equipment. Some of them are old ones that they're waiting to take some of that equipment off so they can be surplused. It's, as Chief said, we're asset rich right now in cars simply because we cannot get them through the upfitters. They're at capacity. This is not unique to Herriman. It's unique to the police world right at the moment. I don't know if it's true in fire, but it's certainly true in police where we're struggling with that. Cost increases have been universal across all makes, models, types. We are in the process of evaluating what are the most appropriate vehicles based on what those officers do. So that's an ongoing process right now. When this department started, primarily F-150s, but we're looking at that. We're also looking at how do we extend the life of these vehicles because they are, as they become more expensive and that upfitting cost gets thrown in there, these are, $80,000 vehicles by the time we're done. How do we make that asset last? And again, this is my commitment to the council is that once we do this, it doesn't mean, okay, this is what we do and we do it forever. This is something we have to look at regularly to make sure that we're recognizing if there are opportunities to save. I don't think there's any like silver bullet in here that's going to save us a ton of money, but I mean, if we can save $1,000, we'd save it. It's just, we were running some numbers earlier, and it's, you know, if you can save $30,000 by changing some things every year, we would do that. There's just a lot of work still to be done in here, and some of it is just hard to get data. So we're working on how do we capture to know that we're making a good decision. So that's the fleet challenge. Today, and so I should say these percentages on the side are what we project the shortfall. So one of the things we're trying to do with fleet, we see we have a certain number of officers and those cars age out. We were worried about, because of all the cancellations in 2020 and 2021, that we were going to get hit with a really large fleet bill in 1 year. And talking with the finance director and having done this in other places, you know you have to replace the vehicle. So try to come up with a fund to smooth that out so you don't see your big hills and valleys. It's kind of a more consistent amount that you know you're going to pay. It also gives you a fund when you sell that vehicle to push that money back in just for that fleet so it doesn't disappear into other areas. So 8.7% we think covers, when we do that based on our current fleet, what that is today. Now, could that move a little bit? Yes. So when we modeled, I think we modeled it at 9%, but we rounded that up. The mental health specialist, this is what we've been referring to as a force multiplier. A lot of our calls that our officers are asked and tasked to go to, they are police calls because somebody called 911, but they are related to mental health. And it's not unusual to see the officers respond to the same address multiple times in a week, in a month. And it's typically related to somebody in crisis. So several years ago, we hired a mental health specialist who would do a lot of that follow-up on the phone with that individual to make sure they were getting their services, they were doing the other things so that they're not hitting the 911 system and requiring emergency response. Because our officers are great at a lot of things, but they are not mental health counselors. And we're asking, in this country, law enforcement officers to do things that they're not really trained to deal with, but they're there, right? So they're going. So we're trying, the proposal would, if we could reestablish that position, it really helps. It keeps us from, we always go on the first one, but if we can avoid the multiple calls to that, it means that officer is available to do other things and not tied up, frankly, in situations that can escalate and get really ugly quickly. Over time, if we need officers, that's about 2.5 or 2.4%, depending on how you spread the vehicle. It could be up to 3. But that's what an officer costs right now. It's about, with a vehicle, to put an officer on the street the first year is $240,000. Just the way it is. I never thought it would be that high. And in other states, it's even higher than that now, but that's what we're seeing. One of the other key needs we have in there is we're at a zero fund balance in there right now. We've been covering all these expenses. It would be prudent to have a reserve. And in this fund, in our general fund, we try to have a 3-month reserve. This is a little bit smaller fund. It's critical, but when you see this, I think tomorrow you'll talk about fund balance policy. It'll recommend that we work to establish a 2-month reserve in HCC for the office, for police. So we've modeled this multiple ways, and drawing tools over the title there. This is the Truth-in-Taxation. If we do this today, these were all modeled at 15%. We're not saying you have to do, it's just that's how we did it. We do have the ability, if council, after we're done, and that if they want us to tweak some of the variables, we could show you that. Trevor is here, he can run that. It's not gonna be instantaneous, it may take us a minute or so, but we could do that. This says if you took 15% and then did all these different things, how it would work. Or is this the 9%? I can't see the title. Can you move that remote control drawing tools piece off there? Otherwise, I got to go, I can open it up too. I can look at it.
That's 9%.
All right, 9%. I didn't think that was working correctly, so I'm going to pull it up here so I don't have to worry about if it pops up again. So 9%. If you did the 9%, you start to struggle. Essentially, you'd probably get to 2026, you'd have to have this conversation again if you were just dealing with fleet. No increases, no people. The next one, did that shut it off? Okay. All right. Next one we did 11%. It covers your fleet. Essentially, your fleet works out to about 2029. There is a 1 year where it dips a little low, and it's something to do with the way this model, and this model is a little bit of a work in progress, so we start to constrain some of these expenses in the out years because they're just trends, and I think that's why you're seeing that. But you get the mental health officer probably till about 2028 as well, right? You kind of move that out there at 11%, but no other police officers. And this assumes you don't do any other, everything else remains steady state. 13%, again, you see that your vehicles are probably through the life, you could just do the fleet. If you added the mental health officer, you're pretty good out to, what is that, 2030, 2031. You have an officer, you can get probably one officer, including their vehicle, out to about 2028, just so you can see that. 15%, of course, your fleet's good, you can do the mental health and the fleet. All these are cumulative to one another. That goes the whole way. You can really get one officer out to about 2032. This assumes you don't do anything else. And we've made some assumptions on commercial growth and what those things would look like. So again, the trend shows you probably get there. Again, that's if you only hired one officer. I don't know that there's any model out there that's going to say that we're going to continue to add 1,000 people a year without triggering the need for more officers at some point. It may not be right away, and we'll show you somewhere we just said, well, what if we did some what ifs. There was a question, well, what if you did annual increases? What would that look like? This is if you did the 15%, you did a 0.5%. You see that 15% and that 0.5% as it compounds actually lets you do quite a bit. If you do the 2% a year, you pretty much do, this doesn't have any hiring, but you likely would have enough headroom you would do hiring. We're not recommending that. We're just showing you, here's how some of this works when we're looking at adding. And we've got a couple. So then we ran, well, what would it look like to just keep them at 0 as a percent? So 1% to the funds, a little over 80,000, to the average home of 587,800, it's about $4.25 for every 1% a year. So when you look at this, and that's in this year, so it would, again, it's going to change a little over time. But we looked at what would it take in order to do that, in order to keep that just bouncing right at 0. That doesn't add any fund balance. It's just what are those costs looking like? Then we said, well, if you did the 15%, could you hire officers? This just shows if you did one hearing, essentially to do any more, we would need to do something else. So the last one we really looked at was, well, if we did it over time and you did 2%, what would happen? And really what we as staff determined as we looked at these different models is whenever we talk about hiring an officer, we probably need to have a discussion about truth-in-taxation. The way that the structure here, so for the last 5 years, we've been able to use new growth to cover both inflation and adding officers. But as our growth slows down, because our growth has been fairly steady, so it means it becomes a smaller percentage each year, right? It's about the same number, and we're actually seeing a marked decrease in the homes being completed in the last year and a half. So as that comes down, it can't cover both inflation for the existing officers and adding new, right? We're kind of at that tipping point. So that is, so we have the ability to run some other models if council is interested. We were just trying to show you what are some of the trends, what's happening in this fund. Again, this is not a knock on law enforcement, but it is it's very personnel heavy, and that's expensive. And their radios are $10,000 a shot for each one, and they have one in the car, one on them, right? So by the time you get to it, somebody asked us once, are their guns, most of their guns are probably the cheapest thing we buy as a city. Everything else is incredibly expensive. We were able to get a good deal on tasers and locked in a price, but I still think, Chief, they're about $4,500 each. So it's a tool you have to have nowadays. We would not send an officer out without it, but everything related to law enforcement is very expensive. So I'm happy to answer questions from the council, and as I said, Trevor's here. If you want to see a certain thing, do that. Right now, because we're still in a lot of the planning phases, even in my staff report, I would recommend that you look somewhere between the 10 and the 15. I don't know that you have to do the 15. Certainly buys you more time to think. But our real challenge right now is how are we going to keep paying for these vehicles? We've been paying them out of the general fund, but the general fund's pretty much tapped out, and we have significant road maintenance needs that we have to address at some point. So that's my recommendation. Again, we modeled 9 and 11. If you did 10, it's somewhere in the middle there of those two models, and we certainly could do that for you and help you understand. So any of those, and I'm going to look, because Trevor Ram, our management analyst and statistics guru, is here to run that model if you have any specific desires you want to see tonight. And Chief can also, I know, can answer questions about their operations far better than I can.
Any clarifying questions from Nathan before we go to public hearing?
I think it might be prudent to explain the inflation and how property taxes work prior to public comment.
I will do my best to explain. I'm going to look to Kyle to jump in. I've worked in 4 states, and I have not seen a property tax that's easy to explain in any state. I almost feel like they come up with an easy way, and then they sit and spend time trying to figure out how to make it more complex so nobody actually understands what's going on. Utah is not unique, but their system is unique. So in theory, in a vacuum, if we just had 1,000 homes and they paid $1 million to the city, those numbers don't work real well, but let's just follow me. If they were the only ones there and they all appreciated at the same amount, every year the city would be entitled to that $1 million. Doesn't matter what the homes are valued. So if they go up highly in value, the mill levy will drop. Assumes they're just these houses. If they decrease in value, that mill levy is going to come up, because in state law they're saying we want this to be a steady state kind of funding. It doesn't count for inflation, or it's just this steady state. But in the real world, not every house appreciates or depreciates at the same rate. You have commercial properties which are also appreciating and depreciating. And so when they put all that together, your individual experience may be different than that. If you look at your tax, you'll see that the mill levy, I think when I got here, was 1920, and now we're, even with this increase, we're going to be at like 1.5, right? The mill levy itself has decreased because home values have increased. Every year new homes come in, they also pay that tax. But whatever they come in, that's that new base that we're entitled to. It doesn't go up with inflation. So we've been able to use that more rapid growth to cover some of our stuff, but we are seeing a a slowdown in the number of permits coming in, especially as interest rates go up. So individuals may see changes in their taxes. Commercial properties have decreased. I don't know what year we're always a little behind on these assessments. It's always like the last year that you're paying. And so as commercial values dropped, they shifted that burden to the residents. The way the formula works, it shifts it to residents. So I don't know, I probably just confused everybody because it's not the easiest system to explain. So in your individual tax, you can see the mill levy go down and the amount you pay go up, but the city still gets the same amount. If it feels like government created that, yes, we did. And there's not really a simple way to explain, other than that, right? We're entitled to a certain amount so that there's a base level of funding. And then depending on your individual situation, if everything stayed the same in the community, you would always pay the same amount. But as those properties move, that's what causes some of those changes. So some people have seen significant. And then in this community, we also have other taxing entities that have increased rates substantially over the last few years. And so the city only controls a narrow slice of what you're paying to property taxes, probably less than a quarter. 23-24% is the city's part. The rest of that is your county. Almost 50% of that's the school district. So those aren't things that we as a city control.
Main concept that I want to get across is that your inflation is not baked into property taxes. As the value of your home goes up, the amount of money that a taxing entity collects does not go up. We collect the same amount. My home value went from 500 to $1 million. The city still collects the same dollar amount, no matter what that home value is. There's that equalization across where they'll change the rate compared to other homes around me, but the same dollar amount goes to the city. So the only way that, say, the police department gets an increase in funds is to increase the dollar amount that we can collect. It's the dollar amount, not the rate. So we're setting the dollar amount and the rate comes after that. And when you look at your property tax, that mill levy rate changes every year so that we collect the same amount of money.
Very much.
That's the hardest thing to understand. I didn't understand that. I'm a financial planner. I didn't know that's how it worked until I sat up here.
I think it's even more complex than that because in actuality, like, if I look at my tax notice right here, for Herriman City, I'm going to pay, last year I paid $113.62 to Herriman City. This year I'll pay $114.89. But the way it was explained to me is because you are based on your county. So if Herriman City's property valuations went up faster than someplace else in your county, there will be a little bit more increase in that, right? It's based on a countywide thing, not just a citywide thing. So it even adds another layer of complexity to the mess.
But those are relatively
Super small.
adjustments of a quarter percent, 1%, something like that. It's pretty small differences.
Yeah, but I just wanted to clarify that because I've had a few people say, no, see, it's a little bit different, and that is why. But when I read those numbers to you, that's out of a $7,000 tax bill, and Herriman City gets $114 of that. So even though we are a contributor to this, we're not necessarily the largest contributor. But that doesn't include Herriman Safety, which is our police and our fire. So, sorry.
The UPD split now or wait?
Right now.
So I've asked the privilege to talk about why we left UPD. There's been several comments about how this tax increase is a result of that. I was our board representative at the time and actually figured out how to get out. We were told there was no way we could get out, remember? There's nothing you can do about it. We're gonna give you what we tell you, and there's nothing you can do, and we figured out how to get out. I'll give you just a couple of, I'll give you a couple data points, and I'll be happy to get into the weeds with anyone on any of the details. I lived it every second of every day. It ruined my health, literally. And I can regurgitate almost all the numbers right off the top of my head. It was a no-brainer decision. We were not receiving the service that we were paying for. That's the bottom line, right? And here's a couple of numbers that show it. They had on paper that we were paying for 28, so this is going back 2017, right? They had on paper that we were paying for 28 officers, close to $5 million. In reality, they only had 18 technically on paper assigned to us, and in practice, there were fewer than that actually serving our area, right? So paying for, what we were told was paying for 28, you actually have 18. We really, in practice, had much less than that. We were not getting much service at all, right? That next year, our bill, and there's a lot more I can get into the weeds about, but the year we left, our bill for services, those same number of officers, went up by $800,000 because they knew that's what we were collecting in taxes. They hired 20 new people that same year. We begged them to allocate some of those to our city, and we were laughed at and told to go home. And that's where, in the meeting that we made this decision, as we were berated by those telling us that we were making a mistake, I said, I feel like, Chief can probably say it verbatim, he's repeated it back to me a few times. I said, I feel like I'm going to school and getting mugged for my lunch money, and as they walk away, they're telling me, bring more tomorrow or else, right? So we simply were not getting the service that we were paying for. When we left, right, if we take their 18 that they told us that we had for the same amount of money, we hired 34. 18 to 34 for the same amount of money, and they stayed in Herriman. They're our police officers in our community. They're not getting pulled away to the other entities involved in UPD, which they often were, which is why there were fewer in our actual area, right? So we want to make sure that our residents are getting the service that they're paying for. The last data point that I'll throw at you is the pooled services concept didn't work. The way it's administrated there does not work. Mutual aid amongst our surrounding neighbors, I mean, it's primarily, and Chief, feel free to correct me on any of this, but primarily South Jordan and Riverton, our direct borders, Bluffdale. We have some assets, they have some assets, and we work with them and we complement each other. They might have a drug sniffing dog and we have, I'm not sure what the right term is for our dogs, the ones who will get the bad guys, right? They have some SWAT assets, we have some, et cetera. There was an incident during the time that UPD was providing that service to us, which we had an active shooter. South Jordan's SWAT team, all the apparatus that we needed responded in 15 minutes. UPD was 45 minutes later. Active shooter, right? I can go on and on and on with so many things, but if there's anyone that thinks that we made a bad decision, please come talk to me. I will lay it out for you plain as day. When it comes to the money, we did not leave UPD to save money. We left to get the service that our residents are paying for. The reason we're discussing any kind of increase really is purely inflationary cost. Inflation is not baked into property tax. We've had no increase during this time. If you go back to that, I don't know if you can go back to that slide, but just regular inflation, cost of living inflation, right? Cost of goods and services. And also the inflation in salaries, right? So 23%, 34%, 37%, that's since 2018. There is a serious shortage of labor for officers. Very few people want to do that job anymore, right? For a lot of reasons. So there are fewer of them, and every agency is chasing the ones that are willing to do the job, and those wages are rising. I have a very close family member who literally 2 weeks ago gave his resignation and is leaving the profession for all the reasons that we've talked about, right? So I just want to lay it out plain and simple that it's nothing to do with UPD, best decision that we ever made. And the reason we're talking about this, and we'll need to periodically in the future, is rising costs to provide that level of service.
And just to point out that since we've left, their tax rate has gone up 35% basically. Just in 2021, they approved a 16.5% increase for that single year. So without having to increase our tax rate, we have grown from, we were paying for 18, we boosted that to 35, and between the same tax rate and then the new growth we've experienced, we've been able to bring that up to 42 without having to change the tax rate over that same time.
I'll just show you what I brought tonight, because I too was part of that decision to leave UPD and create HPD. And I promise you that is the best decision I've ever made on this council, and I'm sure it'll probably be the best decision I'll make on this council, because our residents deserve to have good policing. Chief told me one day, we don't hire police officers, we hire peace officers that police our city. And I believe that. I believe that that's the quality of people that we have here. There's a cost that's associated with that, but in my mind, it's a minimal cost, because I don't think I would do it for the money that they make. They have to deal with people who are not the best members of our society, and they do it to try and keep us safe. I heard some comments tonight about our demographics and concern about becoming like some other cities in our county that have multifamily and different things that we're developing here. And I think that it is critical that we stay on top of our police as far as ahead of the game on that. We have to stay in this 60, 60, 60. Those things are critical, or we will have those types of violent crimes. We'll have those, and I'm not suggesting we won't have those, because at some point we'll see some of that come here, but it will slow that down considerably if we stay ahead of the game on this and make sure that we're adhering to those good principles that make sure that we keep our residents as safe as we possibly can.
Okay, any other comments before we go to?
I just wanted to make sure we got those two bits of information before public comment.
Okay. With council's approval, I think we'll move on to the public comment portion. You will have 2 minutes. Everybody will have 2 minutes. If you'll just state your name, come to the microphone here in front, you will have 2 minutes to address us. Again, I encourage everybody to speak. Please speak. We're here for this. We signed up for this. Whether we like it or not, we're here to hear from you. We want to hear from you. I saw a lot of comments that said we have our minds made up and we don't want to listen. We advertised this starting a month ago, hoping that people would come out, because we did want to hear, we did want to understand. To this moment, I don't think any of us have our minds made up where we're going to fall on this. So please speak. Please, we want to hear your concerns. We've tried to lay out our arguments for why we feel we need to do some sort of increase. But at this point, we're going to open this. I've got 2 forms right now. Are there any other forms that have come in? You don't have to have filled out a form necessarily. It makes it easier on us, but I've got 2 forms.
You're first in line if you did.
Yeah, if you're first in line if you did. So we will start with Dusty Marshall.
Hello, council members, everyone here. Just want to say, first off, that I definitely support our law enforcement. I'm willing to give them money out of my pocket to pay for the services. But I have to ask a question. When are we going to stop increasing our property taxes and voting to do so? When are we going to stop? I mean, the fact it's interesting to me that we're talking about inflation, which we've all been hit by. Everybody in this room has been hit by inflation. And I don't doubt that there's expenses and things. And again, I will gladly give money to the police department for their services. But I'm going to ask, when are we going to stop forcing the increase in taxes to our citizens? When are we going to stop? What's the number? Like, how much are we paying in taxes altogether now is my question. If we have more citizens, more people moving into Herriman, into our area, isn't that more tax dollars that's going to be coming in to our city that will go to law enforcement? Isn't that going to make up, maybe as we have more people move into the area? I mean, I don't know, guys. It's just this taxation thing is just, it's already too high. And I understand you're saying since 2008 the numbers have not increased, but I'm saying they shouldn't increase anymore. It's already too high of a tax rate. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one from Glenn Johnson.
Hi, so Glenn Johnson, Herriman citizen since 2002. When I moved out here, South Valley Sewer District controlled our water. Herriman City took it over saying, oh, this is gonna be a better thing, and if we manage it. My neighbor went to the hospital because we had poor water conditions for a 2-week period that wasn't reported to us for a while. So I'm not saying that, I appreciate everything you guys do and are trying to do, but I think you can do better. I think coming to the citizens to just ask for more money, if it's this mill rate you're talking about, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me mathematically. If my house goes up to $150,000 and you're gonna still collect the same amount, you need to go and find that money, because it just evaporated out of my bank account, and you guys are doing nothing about that then, because it should be going where I had approved it already to go, if that makes sense. If you're taking more money from me, where's it going? And if you guys can't account for that, we need to have something, better smoke and mirrors on graphs and everything else showing me how that's working. It doesn't make a lot of sense that something that's more value and you guys are showing more coming out is not coming to this city and helping the officers. And splitting from UPD, I don't know if that was the best decision or not. We've had a lot of promotions. I don't know if the chief was the chief back then. In fact, I'm pretty sure he wasn't. But there's a lot of administrative costs and higher end costs when you go away from it. Why aren't we looking at maybe combining with Riverton or South Jordan or whatever and trying to our own force in this area? Because there's a lot of overhead costs that we can avoid if it's managed properly. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn.
Mr. Mayor, can I make just one comment?
Yep.
I think no matter how many times we explain this, it doesn't seem to be understood. So I want to do my best to try and reiterate this one more time. Your property taxes do not go up because your house went up in value. Your property taxes do not go down when your property goes down in value. You pay the same dollar amount of taxes. What changes is the mill rate that's charged. If your property goes up, the mill rate goes down. If your property goes down, the mill rate goes up. That is why if your house goes from $500,000 to $1 million, the city of Herriman doesn't collect an extra dollar. It doesn't. So there's no money disappearing. It's just we have more costs and we don't get any more money no matter what happens. The only way that there is more money that gets put into the police force cost is either we add new growth, which does give them some extra money. It's grown from $5 million when they started back in 2018 to about $9 million with the growth that we've had. But the amount that houses are paying has not changed. If we do not adjust for inflation, we will have to cut service, period. That's the only options there are. We don't have to increase taxes. Matter of fact, I hate increasing taxes. I have to pay whatever we vote on too. But if we don't address it, eventually the costs for officers will be so much, the amount of money that the city of Herriman collects won't be able to pay for policing. Simple as that. It's just mathematics. And I want to answer this question is, when will we stop increasing property taxes? When costs stop going up.
Why is my tax double than in the last?
So can
I would say, yep.
This is
So
an important thing to address, yes.
So I'll tell you, I have been every one of these people will tell you I've been the biggest thorn in their side the last 6 months, especially with this topic, right? For all the reasons that you said, every tax dollar is sacrosanct to me, right? As an elected official who represents my friends and neighbors and my own tax money, I have every single one. These guys have heard this. I'm not going to go into I gave them a 45-minute long lecture on how this stuff works, right? And the problem with how governments do budgets. The reality is, and I will show this to any of you, this is my own personal property tax. We moved here in 2009. My property tax has gone from, I'm going to give you the exact numbers. Make sure I look at the right ones. So this is 2010. Total, it has garbage collection. So just property tax, $2,996.42. $2,996.42. These guys know the number because I've told them several times. The number for this year with the school district's increase, $7,274.24.
And Herriman gets the same amount from your 2,000?
Correct.
Sorry. Yeah, we're addressing it,
So
so.
I'm going to address that, right? So please, I am begging you, Mr. Johnson, and anyone else, please look at your actual property tax and look at those line by line. The reason it has gone up that amount is not Herriman City. Herriman City has not increased taxes by 1 penny. We've never increased the Herriman line on that tax. Since we broke away from UPD and now the UFSA taxing district, we've not increased either one of those. Herriman City itself has never done so, right? So look consistently, look across on that line, and I'll show you mine. It's right here. It's plain as day. The dollar amount for my home has fluctuated between $788 a month and $820, per year, and $820 per year. That fluctuation is due to that adjustment that Sherry spoke about. And the mill rate has actually gone down the last several years, right?
It's
Well-
the percentage of, it's the percentage that
Your
you
house value
Let's-
times that mill rate equals
equals
a
the
dollar.
dollar amount.
I would say after this hearing, I would say any of us will stay and sit with you and look. If you have your tax form, we can explain it better. This,
I'll show you my own. The reason that mine's gone from $3,000 a month to $7,200 is every one of those other entities on there has done these increases far more than they should, right? Very little of your property tax goes to Herriman City. Very little. The majority, roughly half, goes to the school district. We have no say in that, right? Another, third goes to Salt Lake County. We have no say in that, right? And then you've got several smaller ones, water districts and all those sorts of things,
Library.
right?
Mosquito abatement.
We have no say in those things. All of those have gone through this truth in taxation and increased the dollar amount that you're paying them. That's why the amount has gone up. It's gone to them. It's not gone to us. Like that is the answer to those questions. Full stop. We can't go back and forth in this forum.
Yep.
I'll be happy to stay afterwards and answer any questions I can. We've only had a few people comment. Please come and, the way that this works is come and comment. We will have our time to close that and give discussion, but I think we want to have as open a discussion and educate as many people as we can. But I think Councilman Shields is correct in wanting to clarify this point. And I will show you my own property tax. The amount that has increased is not coming here, it's going to those other entities.
okay, we're going to continue with the public hearing then. We're going to have to limit the back and forth. That's the unfortunate. We'll try to address all your questions at the end. And when we're taking ultra here, so we'll try to address all your questions. So we'll continue with the public hearing then.
You want to bring that forward if you want to, Chief?
Great. Hello, my name's Chad Danzy. I live at 7005 West Herriman Highway, as many of you already know, due to other issues going on. I am against an increase in the Herriman safety enforcement taxation. First, the proposal for a 15% tax increase with an annual increase of 2% annually thereafter is excessive. I agree that Herriman city officers are doing a good job keeping crime down, but as a taxpayer, property taxes are too high across the board. Does Herriman City really need more funds, or at what point do we simply need to realize there will be an increase in crimes due to an increased population? Throwing more money at an issue does not always improve outcomes. Is Herriman going to provide more services for the funds it receives? Last year, Herriman City Police Department did not even use all of its funds. Some of its designated funds went to other services to balance the budget. It does not seem appropriate to ask for more funds when all the designated funds were not used last year. Again, I am not against our police officers, but I'm against increased taxation. More police officers and funds do not relate to decreased crime. I would suggest trying to save the taxpayer money and be creative. Make the fleet go further, outsource a mental health professional and share it with other cities, and increase the percentage of time officers actually deal with crime from 60% to 75%. These may make enough difference for no tax increase in similar crime rates. Increased taxation and more money is simply not the issue. Please vote for no tax increase. The other thing I like to say is I don't believe it's fair that the person here gets 2 minutes when the person there can speak all they want and that you can't ask any questions. That needs to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Bethany, is that here?
Hi, I'm here wearing 2 different hats tonight. The first hat that I want to address is that I've been a Herriman resident for 20 years, and I love this community. I love this community. And I, in the entire time that I've lived here, have never used the resources. I've never called dispatch or 911, but I am in favor of a tax increase because I am grateful for that service, knowing that it's there to keep our community safe. Second hat that I'm wearing tonight is that I oversee all of the school crossings in our community. There are 43 of them. And currently, I am able to get the proactive support of a police officer to come and help us with the safety of our children. My fear is that if we get behind on the salaries of our police officers and do not have enough staff on hand, then all of a sudden I don't have a police officer who is available to come and help me enforce the safety of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany.
Don't be shy, guys.
Yep.
Came all this way, step up.
I didn't fill out a paper, sorry. Sam Winkler, I live on 13331 Carmen Oak. 25-year police veteran, retired, and I've seen both sides. I understand, because I live in the city, I understand the tax increase, but I also came from a city where they asked us to do more with less. And before we started using the 60-60-60 for officer allocation, we literally just went from call to call. And when I had downtime, my mental health required me, I couldn't do anything. When they're asking to go higher than 60%, 70%, 80%, the PTSD gets to you. And if you don't have that downtime, if you don't have time to take a break, if you don't have time to even check in with the mental health counselor on duty for our own well-being, it's detrimental to the people we serve, because if I lose my passion for that job, I can't serve the public the way they need to be served. Additionally, we want good officers in this city. I don't want to spend $250,000 to hire somebody just to have them go somewhere else. We have to keep that. I mean, we could find officers willing to work for $10 an hour, but are those the ones we want to work for us? They're not. I was a sergeant, and those are not the people we want. It's unfortunate our pay has gone up this high, but people don't want to be police officers anymore. They don't. And to find the people that this community deserves to work for them, to serve the way they should be served, it's a necessary evil that we have to do to give them the money to give us the services we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Sam, I will say thank you for your service. Even though it's not in our community, we appreciate your service.
Sorry, I didn't fill out a form either. My name is Kyle Rands. Been in Herriman for...
Kyle, sorry, will you
What's your last
repeat
name, Kyle?
again?
Rands. Been in Herriman 5 years, in this community for 20. I'm in support for this increase. I don't want to pay more taxes. I understand the issue where we've got a fixed revenue going against a variable expense. And this is where today is the first of what potentially could be many meetings, because we got a problem. And unfortunately, what we're solving today is one hole in a sinking ship. And I don't want to say sinking ship, because that sinking ship's Herriman. But we have a revenue problem in this city. And you look at other cities, they're not having to do this Truth-in-Taxation every year to raise for inflation costs. They're having to do what we're doing in order to meet what's happened in recent events. And I support what we're doing today, and I would say take it to the 15%. And that will affect me. But we have a problem. I have a problem if we're going to come back every year from now on to be able to ask for additional money. And we're not finding that revenue in other sources of the city, or we're not being creative in how we're trying to fund those variable expenses. So I don't have a solution. But as a homeowner, as somebody that knows when you don't have enough, you got to tighten the belt, you got to find ways to get around it. I think you have a community that was willing to support and do what we need to. If there's ways we can be creative outside of let's raise taxes, let's do it. But for today, I support what you're doing, support needing to get to that 15% to solve the problem today, and encourage the council to let's look to find creative ways to solve this. And thank you. I appreciate all that you do. And I know the sacrifices and how much you're committed to this, to what we're doing here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyle. You're okay.
My name is Rich Hopper. I've lived here since 2010 with my family. The one question I really have for you is you're talking about the tax increase, the 15%. You're saying that most of the tax increases that we've gotten on our slip is from Salt Lake County.
The other entities, all of them have been the other entities.
How can you guarantee that 15% that you want to raise our taxes to is going to stay here in Herriman and not go to Salt Lake County? That's the only question I got for you.
And we can, yeah, we'll answer. Okay, we'll answer that.
My name's Lance Reed. I lived here since 2009, and it's my opinion that we're in a cost of living crisis. There's just not enough money. I mean, everybody says that they need to increase their budgets, and this mill rate, that's the first time I've heard of it. I'm sure it's there, but there's got to be better ways to cut the budget. And if it is the other entities that you're talking about in Salt Lake County that have increased the property taxes the most, then, I mean, why not make other businesses, you know? I don't know what it would take, but it seems like if there was other businesses to offset the cost, then that's an option. We've got to, I mean, I drive a beat-up old car, and I drive by and see the nice SUVs and trucks that they're driving here for the police, and I think, man, I'd like to have something like that in my own yard. And so we just have to do something to bring, I just don't want to see my house, the cost of the house go up to the point I can't afford it anymore. And I'm the guy out there at the parade saying, lower my taxes. I've got the boom box, you know, and it just, yeah, we're in an absolute cost of living crisis. I can't push that enough. I know everybody thinks, I mean, especially when Christmas comes around, right? When was the last time you said, oh, I've got enough money for this for Christmas this year? It just never happens. I do 2 jobs, 12 hours a day bouncing on a truck, and I just can't. It's got to stop, you know, as far as the increases. And you guys, I'm sure, are looking at that, but yeah, no more taxation. Increases, I should say. Thanks.
Thanks, Lance.
My name is Blake Anderson, more commonly known to the good mayor as Marty's dad.
Marty, I just whispered that to her.
But if people want efficiency and effectiveness in how their tax money is spent, I suggest they focus and vent their ire toward the public education system in the state of Utah. If anyone has bothered to read the last 7 audits over the last 2.5 years conducted by the Utah Office of Legislative Auditor General, public education is in crisis. They're not using it efficiently, they're not using it effectively, and there's no accountability. And the legislature is part of that problem. Because as we saw, and as we were sold charter schools, and I'm not making a statement whether it's good or bad, would not take any money from public education. But on your tax notice, you'll notice there's a levy for charter schools. Vent your ire, make your discussions relevant to the members who sit on the Jordan District Board of Education, because they're not fully funded, but they won't give you a number as to what they believe is fully funded. And then you have these last 7 audits over the last 2.5 years that are scathing about public education being in crisis. So if you want to control your taxes, you have to look there. Because last year my property tax went up $700. And it's unconscionable. But everybody turns a blind eye, everybody, to public education. Efficiency and effectiveness is not present in that system. And all you have to do is look at those audits. Thank you for allowing me to vent.
Thank you, Blake.
Hi, my name's Dwayne Blackburn. I'm on 14499 Butterfield Parkway. If $114 is all you're paying on your taxes for the city of Herriman, you guys are doing a bang-up job. Honestly, that's a pittance. We could all probably give up our Cokes for a year and double that amount. You know, so I think the city actually is doing pretty well in managing the budget that you guys are given. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is, like the gentleman, a couple gentlemen ago was saying, the cost of living. I mean, my salary went up 3%, and look at all the numbers, 18%. My taxes went up 17% last year. My insurance went up 25%, and the list goes on and on. Yet I got a 3%. There's no wiggle room at this point. At this point, it's go get a part-time job, because there's not much left in the coffers to go after. And honestly, I think the county and the state, or the school boards, they've been, in my opinion, irresponsible. They don't listen to us. I think you guys know that, Olympia Hills development and all that. You know, for years they, you know.
Sorry.
I won't say what I'm thinking right now. You know, you get outside the city, they are unresponsive to the local concerns of the local constituents. And I don't, honestly, you know, I've been to just about every city council meeting here, dang near every one of them, since I moved here 10 years ago. And, you know, like I said, I think you guys have done a pretty good job, but you can't get past higher up. You know, like I say, $114, geez, to run a police department, to pay the utilities here and everything else, holy cow, that's not much from each one of us, you know? It really isn't. So I don't have much time left, but thank you for what you do. I got a son in the police department, and in Lehigh, so I'm pro-force. Thanks.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you.
Dwayne.
Sorry, when we're looking down, we're all trying to take notes.
Hi, my name's Steve Karchner. I'm at 4623 West Brookport Circle. And I just want to say I'm a real estate appraiser, and I've been that for 32 years, and also an agent, a real estate agent that I've been longer than that. So I understand the market, I understand taxes, those kind of things over the years. And you know, one of my concerns is I appraise property in about 9 different counties. And I appraise properties all the time that are worth more than my home, that their taxes are appreciably less than mine. And it really concerns me. And it's not the only problem. I'm just ready to turn 70 years old. And I plan on retiring, hopefully this next year, because I can't keep up the pace that I've been over the years. But the taxes are so high here in Herriman, and it's not, I know it's not just all you guys, but for some reason, almost everywhere I go, the taxes are lower for the same house. And I'm probably going to have to move. My house, my taxes are over $500 a month that I have to put away. And when I have a fixed income, it's going to be a problem for me. So it becomes an issue for me that I might have to leave this area. I love Herriman. I've been here for 15 years too. So I understand it and I like it. But I do worry about the continued increasing costs. One of my other concerns, and I don't understand all the numbers for this, but I live right behind the area where the new dam was built. And that went on for a couple of years. That had to cost millions of dollars from the things that I saw, all the construction work that went on there and everything else. And now it's just turned into nothing. So I'm just not sure how well the money's being spent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Hi, my name's Steve Kratz. I live at 5764 Muirwood Drive. I have more of a comment than anything else. I grew up in a city where police was pretty much non-existent when you needed it, the city of LA. And since I've moved to Herriman, the police department here has been absolutely wonderful. We've had, and I'm sure the chief can attest, we've had lots of issues on Muirwood Drive. And the police department does a bang-up job here. You need them, you call them, they're there for you. You can find them when you're not looking for them. They're there taking, care of the streets and whatnot. I approved the tax increase to have our police department not go in the way of a big city like Los Angeles. Even in the suburbs of Los Angeles, you couldn't get somebody when you needed it. And that's important. When something goes down, you need your police department. The police department has to be there for you. And that's what people have to understand. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Steve.
Marcus Johnson, I live in Harness Cove, been here for about 24 years now. You have a thankless job, and I'm grateful you do it, and I don't, so thanks for doing that. I have a lot of friends who are law enforcement throughout the state and throughout the country, and I train with a lot of them, and I hate taxes. I don't want to pay any more than I have to. Especially the property, you mentioned several times, property taxes here in Herriman is outrageous, and it's just the nature of the beast where we live, unfortunately. Same people complaining here need to also go to the board meetings, Salt Lake County Commission meetings, state, the education meetings we talked about as well. I'm in favor of this tax increase for law enforcement, simply because if you look at studies of cities around the country where law enforcement is not being funded, if we don't do it here, in 10 years from now, we're gonna have the same meeting with members of the community coming complaining about why we don't have a safe community. And so again, getting ahead of it is really, really important. You don't want to play catch up with it when this stuff goes down. It's just not a good place to be in. We want a safe community, that's why we're here, and we appreciate what law enforcement does do for us now. We have a good, proactive community, law enforcement community here in Herriman. I'm thankful for that. And again, I'm for it. Need to stay ahead of it and deal with the other tax issues we have with other places as well. But thank you again for what you guys do, and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marcus. Okay, seeing no other comment, I will look for a motion to close. And I will say also, we did compile, our communications department did compile all of the comments that were made on social media. Even though we say those aren't in public record, we did compile those, and we were sent those. We've seen I read through those. That was my afternoon today, reading through every single comment that was made on social media. So please know that that was taken into account. If you're not here tonight, we have seen those comments. So, but at this point, I'll look for a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion by Sherry.
Second.
Second by Teddy. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, anybody want to maybe answer some of these? I think we had addressed some of these. I wrote some down, some questions.
I will clarify something real quickly. When I read you my $114, that is Herriman City's portion of my taxes. Now, the police department is a completely separate taxing entity, so they get a percentage off of my tax bill, and the fire department is a completely different entity. So there are 3 different taxing entities per se that kind of come into this building, but they are structured very separately so that they can be accounted for very separately. There was somebody that asked how we can make sure that this increase doesn't go to the county. That's how. It is a completely different taxing entity. So when that's collected on your taxes, it will actually go to that entity. It cannot go to the county. It goes to the entity who initiated the tax. So
Nor does it go to any other fund of the city.
I would say
exactly. That's why it's so important to know that, and we structured that way intentionally. There are different places who put it all in the same bucket, and our decision as a council was not to do that because we wanted to make sure that we didn't have what was mentioned earlier. We don't want the police taxes subsidizing capital improvements at the city paying for roads. And in the same token, part of the adjustment here is we don't want our general fund from the city where we're getting those $114 or $118, we don't want that money having to subsidize the police department. They have to be treated as separate entities. I really wanted to read this to you because I think it's important for you to understand this is my philosophy too. I saw this today. The biggest scam in life is paying taxes on the money we make, paying taxes on money we spend, and taxes on things we own that we already paid taxes on with already taxed money. I feel exactly the same way. It makes us all very weary. I agree with the crisis that we're in as far as cost of living. It's impacted my home just the same as it is other people's homes. It's rough. In my answer to your question about when is enough, when are we going to stop just increasing property taxes, I'll tell you my scapegoat would be go to the state legislature. This is all structured there, right? We have no other avenue to pay for our police department. I don't know what the solution is. We'd have to come together and try and figure out a different solution. The fact of the matter is we need to pay our officers. We need to provide them with vehicles. We need to provide them, I believe, with vests and the safety equipment they need because they put their lives on the line for us. So those kind of things we have to provide them with. I agree that they drive a good, dependable vehicle for a reason. They have to respond. I do not want somebody to call with a life-threatening emergency and our police officer's car breaks down on the way there because we've just let it go too long. It's just stuff that you have to take care of. And so I don't know for sure the answer, but I would think that there's a lot of brilliant minds in our state that could come up with maybe a better solution. But for now, it's the only solution I know of that we can tap into to cover the costs. And I feel the pain too. We all do. It impacts my house the same as it impacts your house as far as these continued tax increases. And I don't know what the solution is, but I would hope that we could figure out a better solution. There are states across this nation that don't charge property taxes, and that's because they do things like lotteries or different things that fund the things that are necessary to provide safety, critical infrastructure, and safety for our communities. That were some of the clarifications I wanted to make.
I want to piggyback on that point as well. And I apologize, I'm trying to write down everybody's name as we go, but I can't write that fast. So I forget the gentleman who asked that question, and it's a great one. How do we know how can we guarantee it's not going to Salt Lake County? Because we left UPD, that's why, right? That's what was happening before. We were part of their taxing district along with 8 other municipalities. They took our money. We were one vote on that board, 15. We had one voice of 15. They flat out told us, we're going to tell you what you get for it. We're going to take it all, and we'll tell you what you get in return. That's where we were. That's one of the main reasons that we left. To Sherry's point, to my knowledge at that time, we were the only entity that set up a separate public safety taxing district. All of our surrounding cities, if you look at their same property tax, there's just one line item. It's just the city property tax. And from that line item, they pay for police, fire, and whatever other city things, right? We made and at the time, our financial director at that time lobbied for us to do the same because he wanted that flexibility to use fire funds for police and vice versa, and even use those funds elsewhere, right? Once it goes in that pot, then each year we can use that money how we want to fund those different things. We made the very conscious decision to set up a separate taxing entity that's the only place it can be used. We can choose to supplement that with other city funds, which is what we have been doing for the last few years. We'll go into that in a minute. We've reached a point where we can't do that anymore because we have roads that need to get fixed, and we're giving that money to the police on top of what they're getting from this tax. So that's how we can guarantee it, is we set it up that way. That tax goes to the police department. That's the only place it can go. And it's our police department, and they stay here and they work for us. I'm going to just kind of segue into the next part of some creative solutions. So as our city manager talked about, we're looking at all the fleet things, right? So the 2 big ones are extending the life of the vehicles, right? Instead of a 5-year and whatever mileage it is that they're turning them over, we're going, and you're going to hear us talk about this, we're going to direct, at least I'm going to move that we direct them to do so, right? We need a fleet replacement program, and we need to extend the life of those vehicles longer than they are. And I think we're all agreed that we can do that. We're also looking at the different makes and models. There are some positions that don't require a truck, but there's more math to it. If that truck costs $52,000 and we can resell it at the end of its life for $20,000, and we can buy this other type of vehicle for $42,000 and we can only resell it for $10,000, right? What are the real savings over the life cycle of that? Realistically, back of the napkin math on what we've kind of looked at already, over say a 6 to 7 year rotation, doing those 2 things, we can probably save in today's dollars, and I'm going to look to Nathan, we discussed this earlier today, $30,000 to best case $50,000 a year by those 2 measures, which save the most. So absolutely, whether it's $30,000 or $50,000 a year, or $1,000 a year, or $1, I want to save it and be as efficient as possible. So we're looking at those types of things. The bigger question that I wanted to get to was Kyle's comment about, and I'm glad that you made it because I've made the same comment in other meetings. I support this 15%, but don't take any more after that. Look at other ways to do it, right? How many times have I said that? That's what people are going to expect. And we can't give them that expectation because that's not going to happen. The costs are going to rise before we can capitalize on other things. Really, the way that the taxing structure in our state and really the country is set up is property taxes. And I won't bore you too much with it, but I'll be happy to talk about this. I'm a financial planner by trade, so I talk about this stuff all day long. I actually really like it. But it goes back to when people owned the property you owned produced your income. That's where it came from. It's just never changed, right? Not very many of us are using our home primarily to provide our income as well as our living structure, right? But that's where it comes from. That's the system that we have. We're doing what we can with that. The other avenues we have is what other funding sources does the city have? Not many. There are designated funds. So water, sewer, the things that you talked about, we receive funding for those things specifically. They can only be spent on those things. So the money to build that new reservoir you see over there doesn't come from any of this. That's designated money for that from designated sources. And I keep looking over here to make sure I'm not talking out of turn.
We have used general fund to cover some of those, but it tends to be that it's a one-way. It doesn't come back. So you can use general fund that way, but you can't take those funds into the general fund.
Right. So I'll go back because that's not what I was getting at. So say the water bill. That's what we call an enterprise fund. That's restricted money. We can't use any of that money. If money comes into us through the general fund, so we receive it through sales tax or the $140 goes into the general fund, we can decide how to use that. Do we want to put that towards extra water projects? Do we want to put that towards extra police? Do we want to put that towards road maintenance? You can all see with the damage from this last winter, we're behind on road maintenance. Every city out there is. And that's part of what increased the timing of this conversation. We've been putting money towards the police department so we don't have to raise taxes, but now we're behind on road maintenance. We can't keep doing that indefinitely, right? The big one, I think, is commercial taxes. So somebody else mentioned the businesses to offset. There were a couple of comments there. I'll give this explanation and then let you guys go answer some of the other ones. So absolutely, that's one of our goals, is to increase our tax base. As I was explaining and I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. We talked in the open house downstairs about this. But what is that source? Well, of the roughly, 7% sales tax that we pay for goods and services, 1% of that is what's called a local option sales tax. And it's an option. The local entity can impose it or not. I don't know of a single one that doesn't, because it's really the only other major source of revenue that we have. From that 1%, the city in which that tax originates gets to keep half of that 1%. The other half goes to the state coffers, and then they redistribute it amongst the entire state based on population. So we're fighting with Riverton and South Jordan and any of our neighbors for that 0.5% of sales tax that occurs on our property, on our side of the property line. I tell all my neighbors, I live over by the cemetery, there's a new Smith's on the north side of 118th, and there's our old existing one on the north side of 126th.
The best one.
That's the Herriman one where we get to keep 0.5%. You go to the nice new one on the north side of 118th, that's South Jordan's side of the property line. They get to keep that 0.5%. Like, that really is the difference. Now, the other part of that is we definitely are doing everything that we can to increase that amount of the pie that we receive, but there's only so much we can do. We don't own the property, right? The property owners have to be willing to sell it to those entities and bring them in. Quite frankly, the last 10 years and continue to go on, those property owners can make more money building houses than they can putting in commercial businesses. And we have some tools zoning-wise to do that, and we're fighting tooth and nail to keep everything we can. The other part is those businesses have to want to be here. We don't get to hold up our hand and say it's our turn for a Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's has to want to be here because the demographics are right, because the streets are in the right place, there's enough traffic going through. In my time here, I will take credit for coining the phrase, we're the cul-de-sac of Salt Lake County, right? We're not on the way anywhere, right? There's no main thoroughfares. If you're going into Herriman proper, you're going there probably because you live there, right? We've tried to get employment centers out here. The property owners, the major ones, I'll tell you who they are off the mic, refuse to sell to those employment centers. We're getting hit by state agencies. That's where the land is. It's off U-111. Lots of big employment centers want to come there. Property owners refuse to sell to them. They want to build houses. There's nothing we can do to force them to do that.
Lots of houses.
Right, so as we look at that, we are being as strategic as possible to encourage commercial development along those major arteries that come in and out. So as those areas built around us build out, we can do what Riverton's done to us and capture those dollars as they come in and out of our community. We just don't have very many places to do it. Our location, I mean, you can look at the map that we put up earlier. We're nestled up in the corner. There's no road punched through to Tooele yet. We're not on the way anywhere. So there's people complain about the types of businesses that are here. Again, we don't get to hold our hand up and say, we want this restaurant or we want that one. They have to want to be here. The numbers have to work for them. We're doing everything we can, but we don't own the property, right? We don't run the businesses. The only incentives we can give them is the sales tax that we want from them. That's the only incentive that we have. So we're doing all those things, and as residents, I'll show you my property tax. Every dollar that I agree to give to the city is taking it away from my kids, right? It is. And I said, I've been the biggest thorn in everybody's side about all of this, and I've told them a lot of things that you guys have said. This has been good for me to hear this, and I get to tell these guys, I told you so a little bit. But we need to, part of what the discussion we've had is we need to make sure that we have this discussion with the public. The only way to have the discussion is this. We can try to communicate as much as we can other ways, but we've come to a point where we need to do something. So those are the two main things I wanted to address from the comments is, how do we know the money stays here? Because we made sure it does. It's impossible to. It would actually be illegal for us to send that money anywhere, even in the city, let alone the county. And then really where the big offset would be is the commercial tax base. We're not there yet. Once we develop and say South Jordan and Kennecott develop all the homes clear to the west they're talking about, and we can capture that money coming through, we can maybe make a dent in that, but that's a ways down the road. It's just reality.
I just want to piggyback on really fast on what you just said about, there was a comment made about only having 2 minutes, and I share that frustration. I've been on that side many times too. That is really actually why we did the open house before this for an hour before, so that anybody that wanted to discuss things longer, we'd be available for that. And I think that we've actually tried. I mean, it's been advertised a lot. I know for sure every one of our contact information is on our website to try and be available for the public for those types of questions, because there's certain rules and regulations regarding our meetings. It's just the policies that are adopted here, and that's all that's allowed in our policies. So that was why we had intended to do the open house. Well, why we did the open house before was to try and address those concerns in a more open, engaged fashion.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think that you guys have heard me talk about that a lot, that 2 minutes is just stupid. And it's frustrating because we actually modified our policy recently to allow the council to actually respond to some of those comments when they're happening. In our previous policy, we couldn't even do that. There was no, I mean, you'd talk to us and we'd look at you stone-faced and that was it. At least now we can have at least a response. It doesn't, the format isn't a dialogue, but at least we can give you some instantaneous feedback. So we're trying to improve the process as best we can, but it sucks. We've trying to argue with the county about Olympia Hills and they gave us 2 minutes. It's the same thing. It's just, it's so frustrating. So, I hate taxes. There's nobody in here who likes taxes. I don't even really like government. I don't think many of us like government either. But I will say that, at least representing my own personal beliefs here, is that the fact that we can have interaction means that this form of government is the best form of government. The smallest government closest to the people, that's most accountable to the people, is the one that should be making the decisions. Too often times, there are people that are far away from us, who never talk to us, who don't know anything about us, who are making decisions that are taking way more than $60 a year out of our pockets to pay for all kinds of crazy things that none of us really support. I am grateful that you're here. Whether you support or oppose, it doesn't matter. The fact that you're engaged, you're giving us feedback, this is awesome. I wish there were this many people at every council meeting. We talk about really important things, a lot of really boring things, but important things. And and having residents, members of our community come out and listen to what we're saying, give us input about the decisions we should be making. I can't even tell you how meaningful that is and important that is, and how much impact that has on the decisions we make. I do want to express one thing that is just, it's really frustrating, is that I feel that, like, as a council, we're having to talk about not properly funding our police because they took $50 extra a year to pay for library services, or the school district spends a lot of money, or any one of these other taxing entities have raised our taxes so much from, like Jared was saying, from less than $3,000 to more than $7,000 in 10 years. None of that $4,000 went to pay for our police. None of that went to pay for our roads. None of that went to pay for our fire services. It's all going to other services, and you can argue whether or not those are good or bad, but they're not staying in our community and they're not helping our community. And I almost feel like we're being held hostage because they've raised taxes so much that now we have to sit and analyze and justify every single dollar, which I'm not saying it's the right thing for us to do. That's what we've signed up for, is to do the analysis, to ask the hard questions. But on an average household in Herriman, we're talking about $60 a year, it's $5 a month is what we're talking about, if we approve the full amount to pay for our police. I don't think anybody has a problem with that. It's just that on top of everything else that's been charged. It's a lot, and we all feel it. And luckily, we live in a pretty great community in Herriman. It's a pretty prosperous community, and I hope that this isn't taking food off of people's table, but I do know that it's impacting budgets. Maybe you don't get to take that vacation you wanted. Maybe it's the Christmas presents that somebody talked about. Maybe you're, choosing to eat differently. I know that this is real money, and I know it impacts people. But I also have a responsibility to make sure that we're protecting the people in this community. And so I just want it understood that whatever decision we make tonight, it's not something I take lightly. It's not something that I'm ignorant of the impacts on, or the realities that we're all facing when we look at tax increases. I do want to add one other comment, and this is a big picture thing. People, we often use phrases like the city should pay for something, or the state pays for something, or the federal government pays for something, or the county pays for something, or this should be their responsibility or their responsibility. The reality is, all the money that the state, the county, the federal government, that anybody has is money that came out of our pockets. It's not their money, it's our money. This money that we're talking about is your money and our money. The city doesn't exist separate from the people who live here and the people who pay taxes here. This is all of us together. The summation of those taxes that we're paying in this city, just to give you an idea, the police and fire department run all of what they do on about, what, $9 million a year, something like that each? Is that about right? Police budget's about $9 million, fire's around $9 million. They do a lot with that amount of money. I know it sounds like a lot, but in the world today, that's just not a ton when you're talking, 42 officers, 60 vehicles, all the training, all the stuff they have to do. I think they're doing a pretty good job with that. When you talk about the money, the general fund that comes to the city that we have, it's kind of like the discretionary pool. All money in government goes into these separate buckets and they can only be used for certain things, except for the general fund money. The amount of money that we have discretion over on a yearly basis, $3 million, $4 million total. Just to put that in perspective, the Main Street widening project is $14 million. It's only, what, 1.5 miles of road? I mean,
6,000 West, I've been on them for
Yeah.
years and years, it has to be rebuilt. It's literally built over an old wagon road. There is no way to fix it. It's got to be torn out and done. It's basically a mile. I'm looking, Blake's not here. When I started complaining about this several years ago, it was $3 million. Now it's like $6 million to replace that stretch.
Now, just to put that in perspective, we get $3 million a year. We'd have to take all of that money and save it for 2 years to just pay for one road. We've been taking $1 million out of that fund and giving it to our police department to pay for things up until now. But we can't keep funding that because we can't pay for the other things. Now, this is going to be a scary number. We'll figure out how to get there one of these days. But we looked at our capital improvement projects, the thing that we're supposed to build in terms of roads, road widening, intersections, all the stuff that needs to be done between now and 2050. In today's dollars, the total cost of those projects is $400 million. $400 million. Now remember, we're talking about $3-4 million a year that we have discretion over. So in 27 years, at $3 million a year, we're coming up with, not quite $400 million.
A lot of those things that are not going to get done.
Right? Now the good news is, because with the annexation of Olympia Hills, the amount of money and fees they're going to be paying is about $60 million of it. So obviously that's a big impact, but there's still $300 million plus of improvements and capital projects that we have to pay for as a city. We don't have the money for it. We're not in here banging on doors saying, hey, we need to raise taxes so we can pay for all that stuff. I think that's going to be councils 20 years from now are making those decisions, I hope. But we're trying to do things now that'll make those decisions easier. This last week I spent a couple of hours talking with a group of developers that are talking about the South Mountain down here. The original plans that were developed 15 years ago called for huge swaths of multifamily attached housing and just houses. But we've been working with these guys for 2 years, telling them all the things that as a city are important to us, and they're finally listening. They're talking about adding lots more commercial along Mountain View Corridor, eliminating almost all of the attached and multifamily housing in favor of detached single-family housing. The density down there is now proposed at less than 3.6 units per acre overall, when they were entitled at 4.5 units an acre. So the things that as a city we've been asking for, more single-family homes, more commercial, less density, better ways to pay for roads, all of those things are stuff that as a council we've been working really hard on. And I think we've made progress. That doesn't necessarily really have a lot to do with this discussion specifically tonight about a proposed tax increase for the police. But I think it's important that you understand the big picture stuff that as a city we're trying to face and fix. And if we if we use the money that would be used to apply for those other things to continue to supplement police or any other thing in the city, it just makes us that far behind on every other operation that we have. Now, how do we grow that general fund? That's what Jared was talking about, bringing in these commercial businesses. We've got an auto mall that's getting started. We've got Slackwater Grill. You guys know what that is? They're building right now. They're going to be opening up. It's a big, huge restaurant. Across from where Garage Grill is, there's going to be a new Italian restaurant, Toscano. If you guys know, there's one on 114th and State. That restaurant, they're going to be opening up here. There's hotels we're talking to. There's all kinds of entertainment venues. There's a new construction project going to be going up that's going to bring in restaurants and entertainment venues and an office building. And I mean, all of these things are happening. They're just going to take some time to develop. Once they're fully matured, once the city is, once all that stuff gets built out, hopefully there will be additional funds coming through sales tax and franchise taxes and increased property taxes on commercial that will make it less likely that there will have to be increases in the future. But that's so far down before that all comes to fruition. We just have to deal with where we're at today. So anyway, I know that was a meandering conversation, but I just felt I needed to express those things.
Just a little bit.
Thank you.
I want to give thanks to everybody that's attended tonight, not only this meeting, but the previous open house and the opportunity to talk to you down there in that open format. A lot of the discussions this week I've had was, well, how much a month is it? Well, it's just one coffee a month, right? $5, $6, right? And downstairs talking with, to put that in perspective, with we have some aging population in our community and fixed incomes, and then they're talking about bread and milk and the necessities of life and food on the table. And to some people, it will be that pinpoint. And raising taxes is never a good thing. Taking more money out of the house and the income is never wanted by any of us. It affects us as it does you, because we live in the community. And we love our community so much that we volunteered for this position, right? And it takes a lot of people to be able to have the forethought and looking further in the future to say, we've got an issue. We probably noticed this issue 2 years ago, and we started bringing it up, subsidizing from general funds, and realizing that, hey, we are going to be unable to sustain our growth model and pattern if we don't change or do something. And we have some amazing admin staff that can see that, and we realize that this is our hinge moment, our pain point, that if we don't do something at this current time, that we will be farther down that path and get behind the actual police enforcement curve. And once we do that, there's almost no getting ahead of it. And with the models and the discussion that we've had, 15% is the max we can do. I don't think any of us want to get there, but then next year there's going to be a tax increase, and the following year or 2-3 years down the road, because we can't stay ahead of inflation. Inflation's not going away. Cost of increase is not going to go away. Staying ahead of it is what we're going to be doing now, and hopefully we can keep that path forward. And with growth, like we were talking about, Dusty, your growth. Growth will never pay for itself, because it takes a year or two to capitalize and get that money from that growth. But we've already 2 years of policing that growth. We're already behind there on that. Plus, it doesn't take into consideration those untaxable years on that. There was a lot of great comments, a lot of information out here tonight. And I agree with a lot of what the council said, but a lot of what you've said in the residents about we like to say it's not Herriman taxing you. We tax you, but we haven't raised taxes in 25 years since we incorporated. We haven't raised taxes in almost 4 years since the police have come. And we're trying to tighten that belt, and now it's at that last loop, right, where we got to punch some new holes and loosen it up a little bit to be able to get to that level of service that we want to maintain, especially in the fire district and the police district. And with the economic development, that will help our general fund, and hopefully we can outpace that and get those in to where we can capitalize with the building permits again, hopefully next year, with the increase in population and with the sales tax and revenue, and seriously, buy local, stay local, spend your dollar here, that 0.5% doesn't seem a lot, but it is, it truly is. It's not the neighborhood in Smith's Marketplace, but it still has most everything we need. So I just want to say thank, I mean, I wish there was 30, 40 people every council meeting, every other Wednesday night. We're here at 5 to midnight sometimes. But if you want this kind of discussion or get involved, stay involved, that's how most of us got in these positions, because we raised our hands and asked the questions. And coming to this pulpit here is a little strenuous and stressful sometimes, but your comments are heard, and no decision was made previously. We all had a budget range kind of where we want. I think all 5 of us are on different numbers, but at the end of this meeting, we'll agree on a number between 0 and 15, somewhere in that range. And so, thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Teddy. Go ahead, Sharon.
I just neglected too. I hope I didn't neglect, but I just too want to thank everybody who's here. And I wish we had this many people too, at least this many people at every meeting, but I'm grateful every meeting isn't a tax increase meeting.
Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I don't want to belabor anything more. I think we need to get down to the nitty-gritty and get talking. The last thing I want to say is I think, one thing I've learned from this, I think property taxes are confusing. I think that is what we've all learned tonight. I'll just put out there, if you're a Facebook person, I'm not doing this, but I make myself available every Wednesday. I hold a lunch in the city. It's not, I pay for my own lunch, you pay for your own lunch, but anybody is welcome to come. We call it the Herriman work from home lunch, but that's just how it started during COVID, was we wanted to get out of the house and interact. But I rotate through the different restaurants every Wednesday, and I make myself available for 2 hours. I'll sit there and answer questions while we eat. Please come out. If you want to bring your tax form, and I will sit there, I'll spend that time with you. Any of us, I guarantee you call any of us up here, we will sit down with you and try to explain your taxes over the years. Bring them, we can pull them up, we can look at them. We want to help understand, so you understand where we're coming from too, because this property taxes are complicated, right? But please, I'm telling you, tomorrow, I'll put it out there, if you want to come tomorrow, we'll be at the new La Fountain restaurant tomorrow at noon for lunch. Anybody's welcome to come. Again, I'll be there for 2 hours, talk about anything. You want it all. I know a lot of people in this room I've met through that lunch, so I'll just put that out there to anybody right now. Come out and we can talk about property taxes and we can understand them. So that being said, we need to get, the residents have been here some 3 hours. Let's start talking nitty gritty. Where are we at? Anybody want to make a proposal?
I think I had a conversation with Councilman Henderson earlier today. And I think before there's a proposal about number, I think there's a philosophical approach that we need to discuss or decide, I would say. And I think that is idea of because there isn't an inflationary adjustment in the taxes that we collect as a city, that I think primarily, if we're talking about tax increases, they should be really focused on covering inflationary costs. If we're talking about adding additional officers or additional equipment or things like that, I would hope that a lot of that is funded through the new growth that we're experiencing as a city. Now, I know that's never going to be a perfect thing, because certain number of 1 acre single family lots is going to have different values and different issues than maybe 500 apartments, right? It's going to impact the city in a different way, and you may need different resources for different things. So, but that being said, I really think that the primary growth of the department's personnel should primarily be driven as a factor of the growth in that fund by the growth in the city. And that if tax increases are being used, that they're primarily being used to cover inflationary costs as an adjustment to that base rate that just doesn't adjust with inflation, if that makes sense. there probably is room for a reasonable consideration of the fact that the money that was used for new growth, or that was paid into the thing for new growth, has largely been consumed by not only additional officers, but by inflation too. And there isn't any left that should have been held in reserve for future growth costs. So I would say that it's important to us that if we're talking about whatever the tax increase number is, that we're really clear about how the money that is collected is being allocated. That it's not just this amorphous amount of money that goes in and it just sits there. And it could be, this idea of a fund balance used for inflationary costs. That's concerning to me because I feel like there's always, if it's there, there's going to be inflation that sucks it up. You know what I mean? If it's there and there's a debate about, a cost of living increase, well, they say, well, the money's there, we'll pay for the cost of living increase. I want those to be more deliberative and not accidental things, I don't want it to creep, I guess, which is what I'm saying. So I just put that out there from a philosophical standpoint. What are your guys' thoughts about how we approach the funding of the police on a go-forward basis?
So you and I discussed it, and I kind of raised the question with several of you. Because there's so many things to talk about. So this particular instance, so going back to Kyle's comment of, I'm good with supporting whatever increase to give you what we need for the situation right now, but then figure out a way to pay for those increasing costs later. We've done our best to explain how we've kind of exhausted those other ways to do it for now. And inflation is going to stare us in the face, that we are going to face increasing costs and a level pool of funds. The only thing that changes that level pool of funds is new homes being built and that new tax money coming in. So the way that this is usually done in any government entity, and it is the easier way, is to just, and I think Nathan pointed this out in the models, is you just use that money for the inflation, and then you come back to the residents and ask for more money when it's time to hire people. But I think, to Steve's point, correct me if I'm not articulating this properly, and it's kind of how I feel about this. After going through this, as a financial planner, people always ask me, what would you do if you were me? I'm like, I'm not you. But I have to try to put myself in their shoes, understanding their concerns and their views and their priorities. What would I do if I were them, knowing what I know? And that's kind of how I try to approach this. Knowing what I know now, how should we fund it going forward? And this is, I've said over and over, I'm more concerned about Kyle's point of what happens from here than I am what happens today. Every dollar is important. Today's is relatively smaller than the next increase because it's a compounding math problem. If you're talking a percentage, it's progressively more and more and more. I'm more concerned about the path that we're setting down than I am the finite decision today, right? So I think this speaks to that. So to me, it's one of two things. We can use that new growth money to pay for inflation, and we come back and ask for more money from the public when we want to hire people. The problem that I see with that is that we do kind of have finite boundaries now. We know where that is. There is a build-out date, and there will be a time when not only do we have decreasing new growth revenues to pay for inflation, but there'll be a day when it pretty much dries up. And then at that point, then you're coming back to the public and saying, now we need to do a bit of both. We got to make up for what we hired, and now we've got to switch to doing inflation when we never did that before. It's more difficult to do, I think, what Steve proposed, but it's knowing what I know now about how this works and that path. I would much rather designate those funds in the budget. That new growth money is set aside to pay for the new growth officers. The new growth should pay for new growth. To Teddy's point, we may be a little bit behind because we used it this last year, but we need time to do that plan. And for the record, that's what I've advocated. I want a plan. I don't want to go to the public and say, we want some money now, and then we'll figure out some more later. That's what all these other entities do. and I've done the math, it's an average CPI inflation, 2.5% per year over the last 10 years. That's including the last couple of years that were terrible. Average 2.5. Excluding, so Herriman's, they're the only entities, those three never increase taxes. The rest of them, those increases I explained to you, that's an average of over 8% per year compounding. Every other entity does it that way. Let's get what we can now, we'll figure out the rest later. Inflation happens, they, to your point about that fund balance, they spend the money and then they say, we need more, right? I think, to me, that describes the ire that we all have about that property tax. I think what we want to do, what we've been telling our people the last several months that we've been debating this at literally every council meeting, work meeting, is we want to do it differently. We can't keep doing the same thing everybody else does and expect a different result. That's insanity, right? So we want to do it differently. So we're going to talk about some of the things we're going to do differently. This particular point, I think, is important because it does set us down a path. And if we don't make a conscious decision about this tonight, we are making a decision to do the one, because it's just what happens. Right? So looking at the end game, that's kind of where I'm following with Steve, is I'd much rather designate those funds for those officers and look at what that path is for the inflationary costs and keep that in front of our residents, because that's the service level discussion, right? To keep the same service level, we need this much more because of inflation. Do you, the residents, want to pay for that or not, right? And then that gives us a sustainable path in the future rather than reaching that build out and, okay, now the conversation is different. Now we got to go back and do it. And I've said this many, many times because I think some of you have reiterated this or tried to express the same thing. I think no matter what we do tonight, there's more to come in some fashion, right? For what I just discussed, what's the path? For me, if there's a framework of a plan, so let's say we go 3 years down the road, we have some money built up from the new growth, it's time to hire some people, we have our metric, the plan we talked about, that's the important part to me, is the plan that determines how and when we add people to those metrics and triggers. We haven't discussed that in front of all of you. It's on all of the material. It's what we've discussed for the last 6 months. The way we will add people is much different than any other agency has done. Much more progressive, and I really love where we're at there. I've gone from 0, because I want a plan, to I'm okay doing some because we have a good path forward. There's just a couple things we need to discuss tonight with you all, right? So can we set this aside and we go 2 or 3 years down the road and it's time to hire people, and maybe we have enough and there's some extra and it rolls over just like the fleet replacement fund to the next one. Maybe we're a little short. Maybe wages have increased again and we're fighting for people and we need 100,000 more. Well, that's part of the inflation discussion, right? That gets added on. So it's not mutually exclusive, but we have a plan and we have set money aside for that purpose, and the new growth is paying for new growth. And at the end, when new growth stops, we have our service level and we're continuing that path that we've gone on with the public of this is the discussion we're having every few years of that level of service and what we're willing to pay for. Is that?
I think you articulated pretty well.
So I think it's almost the end, but it's also the beginning discussion for us.
Because it
what
really
do you guys
determines,
feel about that?
What decision we should make tonight is not only the decision about right now, but I think it impacts what decisions come next and how we deal with what might come down the road.
And I think that goes back to the philosophy of how Truth-in-Taxation is supposed to work in the origination of why this is a great exercise to actually do a pretty in-depth audit of best practices, hiring policies, build-out policies, and fleet management. All those things we were able to be privy of from the staff and get those numbers on. And we're still learning and building that plan out. At least we have a great framework of what we can see. And if you look at the models, if we do the 8 to 12%, it gets us at a pretty baseline for a year and a half, maybe, right? Without hiring or without the potential of hiring those other 3 officers. And then are we prepared at a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years coming back to another 7 or 15% then is again, right? And the philosophy of doing the 15 and an incremental of 0.5% or 2% ongoing for a couple of years or 5, 6 years, how that works. I don't know what the best forecasting model is, and a lot of it's fancy graphs and information that's been well put together. And if we stick to the plan, because it is a path, right? But it's going to change and shift and move depending on how fast we grow and how fast the economy changes and what we do with our officers and how fast other entities raise their salaries and employments. And it's usually a race to the top for a couple agencies. And our philosophy here is we want to be in that middle range. We want to pay our officers good. We want to have them a good balance so we don't lose the good ones. And most of the good ones don't jump for a couple dollars an hour. So we have some good officers. But what does that look like? Do we want to have security in their job, security in the police force, security in what we want it to be? And I'm still a high proponent of that higher end for this evening.
No, I agree 100% with that philosophy. New growth should pay for new growth. And the only way you do that is if you set it aside. I think we're behind on that because we haven't done that. So we have to figure out how to rectify that and bring that up to balance. And then make sure that that is set aside to pay for new officers that will be required from new growth. Absolutely. Because I think that's a lot of the concern with residents too. It's like, why are we continuing to have our taxes increase to pay for all the new people that are moving to our communities? The new people should have to pay for the officers that are associated with that growth. I think that after a while, that will dry up, and you'll still have a continued need for new officers because crime will change in our city and the dynamics of our city will change. And I think that having a good plan is good, with the caveat of understanding that that's the plan for us 5, but in 2 years from now, the dynamics at this bench may change. Every
It could in 6 months.
Exactly, and so, but I think as long as we implement a good plan, it's easy to help others understand why that plan is in place and help to encourage them to continue that.
Okay, Destiny, can you pull up that slide that shows the one that shows like the 8.7, that one. So I think this is what we're down to. If I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to jump ahead maybe and interpret. If I'm understanding council, and tell me this is what a few of us have kind of discussed. We're looking at the 8.7 and the 1.1 for sure. I'm hearing currently no other requests above that. Is that where? And I know you said you want to go higher. I'm trying to understand where, Jared, Steve, where are you guys at? Is that the 2 you'd like to stop at the 9? So that'd be 9.8%.
I would say the round it to the 10% number, right? Just
8.7 and the 1.1.
Yeah, 1.1. The 8.7 was modeled at 9%. I'm okay with that small difference there. Anything above that, I think I said it. I don't want it to be used to absorb inflation, right? I want it to be there to repay what might have been used to pay for new officers. Or that it was used to pay for inflation, but it should have been used to pay for new officers. And if we were determining that we were going to put money back in for the hiring of new officers, I could maybe support going a little bit above that. As far as the hiring new officer today, I think our residents would rather us be as conservative as we possibly can right now. And then if there's another adjustment that needs to be made because of something down the road, then we need to come back and make that case to the residents again. I don't want to just because we could go up to 15% just automatically do it and then say, oh, well, that just kicks the can a little farther down the road before we have to bring it back to the residents again. This is not the most pleasant of processes, right? It's been hard work. We've spent hours and hours and hours having communications and conversations with residents, but I think it's the right way to do it. We bring the case to the residents express their concerns about it, and then, you know, we make a decision about it based on that input, not just, I don't want to put the cart before the horse is what I would say.
What, I agree with most of that, Steve. What's the forecast? When do this goes into effect? When does the tax increase go into implementation?
I'll look to Kyle. He can give
November.
Correct. So it'll be on November's property taxes. So
we'll collect this year, this
correct.
annual. Okay.
Correct.
When is our proposed hiring or allocation for officers, and how long does it take them to get up to speed?
So if you added an officer, you'd have to do a budget amendment to do that. But typically, right now, we are a place, when we put out, we get good applicants. We tend to do a lot of, I'm just lost the word, horizontal transfers, essentially transfer officers. So they're already experienced officers coming in, and so getting them on the street is faster. If you hired somebody out of the academy, it's actually quite a while to get them on the street. So from start to having an officer where we're actually spending a couple months, right? Because if we're bringing from another agency, they got to go through the notice. We still do background checks. We do all that. But again, since we're getting more experienced officers here, it tends to be a little bit faster for Herriman.
Wait a sec. I just want you to clarify that, because I know we talked about this before, a couple months on experienced officers, but will you clarify how long it actually takes if we have to bring somebody out of the academy before they can actually be in a car by themselves?
So if we were to take somebody off of the street and offer them a job that they have no police experience, it's between 10 and 11 months before they're in a vehicle by themselves policing. And they continue some basic training beyond that. Typically, lateral hires, or people coming from other agencies, we can get in a car in a month. They still have to have a minimal FTO process, field training process. But the overhead basically that we see is in the hiring process itself, right? There's a lot of work that goes into that. And a lot of that is, even though they're currently a police officer, we want to make sure they fit Herriman, that they're not, we go through the background, talk to neighbors. It's extensive. And the process that they go through to get a job is extensive and in several elements. So you're still a couple months out. I would say that if we were to make that amendment, we would still be December before I have somebody in a car by themselves.
Just a kind of a tidbit for public consumption. We've discussed these things ad nauseum and sometimes forget how much we've been talking about the last 6 months and continually, and what the public knows and doesn't. So just to, I think this is huge and plays into this discussion of not getting behind, right? And I brought this up in one of the meetings. I put Chief on the spot. I knew that, I kind of knew what the numbers would be, but I didn't know for sure. I just guessed. But my question was, how many, if we have an open allocation, how long does it take to fill it? So so right now, if somebody leaves and we have a police position, somebody retires or they move out of state or transfer somewhere else, on average, how many applicants do we have and how long does it take to fill that spot?
One of the things that's an advantage for Herriman is we have pretty good recruiting power. So we never have a lack of applicants.
People want to be here.
What's that?
People want to be
People want to come here. They want to be here, but we have officers that want to come here. And our largest recruiting effort is from the people that work here now. They reach out and say, this is a good place to work. And to make a point about salaries, we often say that it's a race to the top. I heard Councilor Hodges say, it can also be a race to the bottom as we've seen in California and other states. Okay? And in Herriman, we have a little bit different philosophy. The wage can't be it. And this is why we don't lose officers to other places. Wages are dissatisfiers. You're happy with your wage for a very short time and then you're dissatisfied and you want more. So in Herriman, we've taken the philosophy that wages can't be the only reason that somebody either wants to come here or stay here. And we see that in the type of equipment we get. And Councilor Orrin, we had this conversation earlier today.
I will never support, as your police chief, sending men and women out on the weekends and nights and every other unspeakable time to deal with what they have to deal with without the best equipment. We owe that to them and their families. I don't want to be making notification to somebody because we were cheap and didn't give them what they needed to do their job appropriately. So to answer your question, people come here and stay here not only for the wages, which we were in the middle, but they come here for the experience of working here. It is a great place to be. It's a great policing experience. Our residents are wholly supportive of law enforcement, which isn't the case in other places. And our officers have a great experience while they're here. So I would say that, yes, we have great recruiting effort, but we also have a great pool we can draw from. And I don't see that changing. I do see that Herriman is the place to work.
And it's all those factors go into it. And kind of where I'm going with this is it's not the case with a lot of other agencies, right? If you look at even our surrounding cities, if they have open, in our meeting, I picked on Salt Lake City Police Department. But there's 100-some officers, and there's an average of how many vacant positions they're trying to hire for.
Yeah. So publicly, they'll say, you know, I think they have 500 officers are in that arena, and oftentimes they'll have allocation openings of 60 to 70 open positions.
Those are police officers that they need on this, you know, working right now today that they can't get because they don't want to go work there. We have zero. We have an opening. We get an average of 50, 100 applications.
We've seen a little bit of a decrease, but you know, it wasn't uncommon early on for us to get well over 100. We've seen a decrease, but what we haven't seen is a decrease in quality. We've seen some of those people that we wouldn't hire not reapply, so that number, they've kind of stopped
Figured
applying.
out that we aren't going to hire them.
And so a lot of that first was like, maybe they'll hire me. And as we didn't, we've seen that number go away, but the quality of people that still apply is second to none.
Which just speaks to the job that we're doing, and when I talk about maintaining that level of service and that pathway, like that's my concern, so we don't end up like those others. When we mature, we top out and the funds dry up and people don't want to be there, right? Then we end up with those sorts of things. So you didn't want to.
Oh, you're good. And speaking of that level of service, today was the first day of school, elementary school, and as we walk there, I pass one of our officers and he's doing traffic enforcement there and crosswalk enforcement and education. And then there's another officer across the street doing it, and you got the amazing crossing guards, and all that falls under the privy of the police, and they do an amazing job. And if we don't have the growth model or the officers to do those items, those are the first things that go away because they're running from call to call to call. And so, Chief, when you said that we could have somebody in the seat by December, was it December 23 or December 24?
I'll let you choose.
I think you're
Depends on
saying
if it's
December
from the
24.
academy or
Well, yeah. I mean, even if it's a lateral, you're still background checks 3 to
There is.
6 months. And
It's
all
an
that
extensive process,
Yeah.
and we're not in the business of rushing to have an officer on the street. Again, we're about quality. So our process is a little bit more extensive because I don't want to make a mistake. And that's also why when we have officers come here and work, our disciplinary efforts are zero, really. We have the highest quality officers you could have in this state.
And if you've ever had to have interactions with them, they're amazing. And that's why, I mean, if we don't do another additional 2.4 up to the 15, but I'm definitely over the 10%. I'm 12 to 13 probably. To answer your question, Mayor.
Okay.
So for me, for the public, again, I've started at 0 and have been a huge pain in everybody's side with all of this because I want to see the plan. I don't want to just throw money at a perceived problem, right? And then say, good, we'll worry about the rest later and come back and ask for more. I think I said this to somebody earlier today. I think we're 75% of the way on a good framework of that plan, which for me, so I'm just explaining where I'm at to everyone else. I've told most of you many times. I'm come from 0 with no plan to having most of a plan and framework of it, how we're going to go forward, to being comfortable with fixing some of the problem today. And to me, that is the first two. And that kind of makes us whole with what we've been taking from the city for other things, right? Roughly that $1 million a year that we've been taking for just a quick example, street repair. Those things are important too, and we are getting behind those. So the fleet replacement, it's not just, I think I said this to Nathan and Steve and Lauren earlier today, and I've talked to Sherry about it before, and Teddy's heard me. If we're saying we want to make changes to the fleet, right, the ones that we described, I have a hard time then saying, here's the money to keep doing what you're doing the way we've been doing it, right? So what's important to me with this number, I am okay with this as long as there is a complete fleet replacement program put in place. Those funds are allocated to that replacement to do what Nathan described earlier. So to go back several hours to our city manager's presentation, that vehicle replacement would be, not all of that money would be used this year. In fact, I don't think we have plans to purchase vehicles this year. That money would go towards the next year's. And say we only used 500 of that, the other 200 stays in there to go towards the next round of funding. There's going to be some years like we've experienced. We've been on wait lists, and the cost of, you guys, if you bought new vehicles yourselves, you know what it's like to wait for that new vehicle and the rise of the cost. You ordered it and they came back and said, we want $10,000 more, or we're going to cancel your order. Same thing has happened to us with every vehicle order. So we just experienced that, where we're planning on this much and now they want this much, and we're borrowing from next year to pay this year. I'm okay with this number going into a plan like that, that helps buffer that cost out over the life cycle of those vehicles. So I've come around to that. The mental health specialist to me is an easy one. That's absolutely needed. We have somebody's comment earlier, can we work with other cities to outsource it, et cetera? We probably have a need to hire 3 or 4 of those just in our city. I mean, just in our city to take the load off of the officers and help the officers. So that one and 1%, so 1% is roughly $80,000 a year. I mean, per household, that's $5 a year. I hate to put it in those terms. I have a visceral reaction anytime any politician says it's only this much because of that compounding thing, right? I do time value calculation of money. You want to know how much money you need to retire tomorrow? That's what I do every day in 10 years. But that one is absolutely needed, and it's a minimal cost. So to answer your question, with the plan in place and the framework we have, I'm good with those two. But I kind of agree with Steve. I don't want to, say, put a cushion in there without it being designated, allocated for something. No matter what, I'm going to give full expectation that we will have to come back periodically, either to, whatever we decide on that next bit of the policy, either to hire more officers or that inflation component. There are rising costs, and the tax rate is a finite amount of money. So
you're at 10.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not going to be it's not going to be a one-time thing. You've heard all this forever.
I know.
Yeah. I say, I've been a huge pain to all of them.
Okay, Sherry, where are you? I'm just trying to get a feel. Steve, where are you?
I just got a message. My father had to be taken to the hospital. I'm going to step out for a second and just call and get some information. But I'm comfortable at the 10%. I could be persuaded up to maybe as high as 12.2 if it was really needed to hire that additional officer now. But I haven't necessarily heard the case that our statistics demand that we need to make that higher right now or in the next several months. If that case is made and it's good, then I'm okay going up to maybe as high as the 12.2. But that's where I'm at right now. But if you guys get to the point of a vote, that's where my support is. If you guys will just let me step out for a few minutes, I'll be right back.
Good luck, Steve. Sherry, where are you looking for? I'm trying to just get some consensus here so we can get to a motion.
Pretty much am echoing Steve, just because my concern about not doing the officer, because quite frankly, I can tell you before I came, my feeling was more around the 10%. I felt pretty comfortable with those first two. Because I agree, I want to make sure that there's that plan in place that that the growth is paying for the new officers. And so that's the question. Is this 2.4 to make up the difference of what we've spent out of what we shouldn't have? Is this what we've taken from the growth to pay for inflation up to this point, and this gets us even?
Well, I think the total 15% would be, but that 2.4 is just for the additional 3 officers and outfitting.
So we say it's
One officer.
2.4% per officer. The inflationary dollar that you've lost when you just run there's different ways to it's about 15%. From the day we started till now at that 2.56%, just roll it out.
And Chief, I'll let you jump in too. In our conversation, I asked if we were to add one officer, where would that be? And it's for the peak times. And those peak times when
That's correct.
I think understanding the biggest crime we see in Herriman right now is domestic violence. And that takes 2 officers on call, usually an hour.
To be clear,
at least.
Our biggest issue is property crime.
Right.
And as far as a person's crime, yes, domestic
violence.
We are not a city where we have murders and robberies.
Right.
But we are a city where we see domestic, or I should say family crime. One of those I might add is that we have a strangely unique issue with sex crimes. And we were told about this through the schools, and we started to see that trajectory change, and that is upon us right now. And it's a troubling thing, of course, and it's something we need to address, but currently our biggest issue is at that peak time where the officers are falling behind.
So my concern always been if there's 2 officers on a DV call.
Well, and that, yes.
During a peak time, you're down to 2 officers in the city.
Yeah.
Which below a safe.
So our minimum officers in the city is 3. Typical shift has 5 on them, but of course we have vacation and other duty loss issues, training and sick time where the officers are not present. It becomes an officer safety issue during that peak time because other calls either are going unanswered or take an exceptionally long time to get to because we're having to send 2 officers. And quite frankly, domestic violence calls can take 3 officers to be safe. It just depends on the nature of the call. I was on one the other day that took a total of 4 because they had split and we needed 2 officers in 2 areas, and I was one of the 2 officers, much to the chagrin of the other officers that were wondering if they were safe with me. They prefer I stay in the office and handle paperwork. But that it becomes a significant concern when we're talking about officer safety during those peak times.
Okay, so I'm just getting a feel of, so.
I'll echo what Steve said. Like, what is the case for adding the 1?
So we haven't.
If we add the 1, where would it go? How would it help those situations?
So we would put that officer in a peak slot, probably on like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday combination, and it would be in the afternoon to evening hours that's where we're seeing our greatest peak. Now that's not to say that on the flip side of that, and we run an A/B schedule, so we have an A platoon, a B platoon, right? The flip side of that is earlier in the week, and we don't see that we have peak times. But we're not seeing that extended peak times or the type of call that comes in on the peak times that are more geared towards a weekend. We're seeing that need for more officers in that area. So if what you're asking is, can we step resources in over the next few years? Of course we can. That's our goal, right? Is to come to you and say, these are our times, these are the issues we're facing. And again, in the silo model, it's just not specific to patrol, it's specific to the other administrative and special services divisions as well.
For me, my question is primarily, the question that was asked is if we do, at least in Steve's words, 2.2, I can be talked into what it takes to, right? A new officer average costs $240,000. Just talk about cost saving measures. Mental health specialist, 80 to 90,000 versus an officer, 240. We could use a couple of those to take the load off of them, and they're actually trained to handle some of those things. But for this discussion, what was just proposed is, okay, well, if we go to 12.2 and we give direction to hire that officer, where would it go? And knowing full well that we have the rest of the plan that we're working on to add those others.
Right.
Order. Exactly.
in a step, and those others should really be added by the growth process, by the additional revenues that come in.
The plan that the
And then-
framework we've discussed. And
Right, and then the next time we have this type of a meeting is just simply going to be to address inflationary. And maybe we'll get lucky and next year, all the inflation will go away and fuel prices will go down.
Well,
But I'm not anticipating that.
But if the Fed, sorry, I'm gonna squirrel a little bit. If the Federal Reserve has their way, we're gonna have a recession and we'll have zero inflation.
Exactly.
But that's the thing about inflation, is that it's not something that's constant. It
Right.
it changes with the different economic factors, and it is an average over time. And I bored them with all of these numbers, right? That average 2.5%, that includes the 7.5% last year and the 60% before that, but it also includes 0% in 2014, right? And a negative percent either the year before that or after that.
Yeah.
So in those years, then there won't be that need. So when I say that inflationary discussion is going to be at least every 2 years, it's probably 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And doing those small increases, so to put it in dollar terms, if we're doing that and say it's a 2 or 3% adjustment, and the dollar amount does grow because it's a compounding math problem, it's exponents here, right? But that couple of percent a few years at a time is a lot easier to digest, plan for, and operate. Not only here, but think about your family budget, right? When I talk to people about saving and investing, I can do that math and say, okay, if you want to retire at this age with this much money, you need to save $3,000 a month and get 10% return. Oh my gosh, no way I can do that. Then start with something smaller, and every year add a little bit to it. And when I run that math, we get pretty close, right? If you're consistent about those increases. So that's more of a go.
So can I ask?
We want to recap for Steve. For that, the case for the extra officer, I asked where would it go? And the answer is it would go to peak times. I don't know if you want to restate that for Steve.
Peak times Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah, so, and that's a little bit of a math problem in of itself, right? We pull statistics, we determine when our peak times are, not only by day, but by time. And I was talking to some of our residents earlier today. We're a different city in that we're a cul-de-sac city, and in the other cities in which I've worked that were much busier and much more person crime related, the peak times are much, much different than we experience in Herriman. We do have a peak time at 7 a.m., which is a little unusual for domestic violence and other things. And we also have that same peak time, but larger in the afternoon. And typically those peak times are happening more on those later week to early weekend calls. And any time that we have a domestic violence, it doesn't mean, it's not like another call where I go and I write a report and leave. There's other things that compound that 160, right? More time on the call. If I have to take somebody to jail, they're out of the city, I might fall below minimums. I have to consider that. I have to book evidence. That's taking people off of the street to do that. So when we deal with those calls, it becomes a much longer process. And as we watch those 60 metrics and we see that in other cities, that number get to 60 or over, where a cop's on a call for 2 hours, you're in a violent crime city and you got a problem that's gotten away from you. You no longer are in control of it. And when we're talking about the 60%, the 60 minutes, the 60% forward facing, there's cities, and I can give you all of the, examples that it has gotten away from them. And they're upside down in those numbers. And it's very clear to see when you drive through the city that that's the case. And people wonder how that happened. It happened because they didn't stay in front of it, right? Now, I will say that about Herriman and Councilor Shields, and I've talked about this quite a bit. We are a city that has a greater conflict resolution skill than most cities I've ever worked in. We don't solve things with a brick in the front yard when we're mad at our neighbors. We typically can work through it, which does mean that we're not getting the police called as much, which also means we can police 60,000 people with 42 cops and 25 square miles. That doesn't last forever. Things are going to change. I don't need a crystal ball to tell you that, and nor does anybody else. The question of that, and this is a much larger philosophical discussion. You know how I feel about community services. Not everything, the police officers don't have to go on all calls. And we've instituted a community services program because I feel strongly in that. I feel strongly in that we can have civilian members of our police department go out and do those things at the top of their licensure that are less expensive for them to do and for us to receive the benefit from. I don't need a police officer booking a found bike. So there's other ways to do it. And to answer your question, Councilor Henderson, we're exploring those at a greater rate than other police departments. And just know that there might be a time in our future when I'm coming and asking for help in that area. We are about maxed out in that area. The two people that we do have are really working hard. You all know who they are, Jenny and Aaron. They put in a ton of work in keeping this city correct and clean and orderly. And those are those little things when you're in neighborhoods doing community service, like, you know, what the house looks like and whether there's a fire hazard with weeds and those kind of things that make us tidy and clean.
Because I'll look to Kyle, can you, or somebody, can somebody run, just, I want to put a number out there to the residents too. If we were to do 12.2, what is that number on the average?
585.
Just
You want us to run a model so we can show it to you? 12.2.
I mean, approximately. I mean, we may not be exact.
What's the average cost per
It's
home?
$4.25.
So close, Trevor.
It's like 50.
How much?
$52, 50, something like that.
So I may shock everyone up here,
5185.
but I'm ready to make a motion.
5185. So if you do, okay, so that's 5185 per year to the average house.
Just under $4 a month.
Okay. Again, I'm not trying to say it's only that, right? I'm just saying I want to put that.
And that's the thing is, I hate, we have to say that, but I hate it.
Yeah.
Because it's a compounding number. So prefacing this with everything you all have heard me say, and now everything you all have heard me say for
I have no idea where you're going,
6
so I'm
months,
nervous.
It says 15%, I'm leaving.
I will make a motion to approve resolution number R23-03, adopting a rate of tax at 12.2% with the specific direction for the fleet replacement plan that we spoke of, the new officer allocation growth plan that we spoke of, including the difference between inflation and growth. Is that vague enough, Jackie?
You got a head nod.
I'll second.
For levying taxes upon all real and personal property within the Herriman City Safety Enforcement Area.
I'll second.
Motion by Jared, second by Sherry. Jared?
Yes.
Teddy?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. That motion carries. Again, we appreciate everybody's input tonight. Again, please reach out to us if there's questions on this.
I will stay as long as anybody wants.
And I'll
me
stay
to.
tonight too if you want to talk tonight. So this, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the Herriman City Safety Enforcement Area meeting.
Motion by Teddy.
Second.
Second by Steve. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Go find out what's going on with the box.
So, quick side note on that, right? A new officer doesn't necessarily have to be higher title. No. It goes towards that model, but it gives cushion